from both definitions, we can see a loss of control, right? We can see a situation where a person has lost his or her ability to regulate or to control, right? And so let's see what the experts say about it. First of all, it's a cluster of physiological, behavioral, and thinking experiences. So physiological means that it affects your physical, your body physically. And then behavioral means that it alters the way you behave, right? You know the relationship between attitude and behavior, right? So that takes us basically to the next thing, thinking. Our cognitive experiences are altered as well. So attitude is the thinking part that gives birth to behavior. That's one. Two, a use of a substance takes on a much higher priority for an individual or a given individual than other behaviors that once had greater value. So for example, when a person is addicted, how you get to know is that the person starts to place more importance on finding his choice substance, right, over every other thing that used to give him value. So for instance, let's say he was a passionate band member or served in the church passionately. You find that begins to nosedive, and he would want to really, really go ahead to use substances all the time. Or such a person may not take school seriously anymore. Or if he was such an active sports person, that person ceases to be such enthusiastic about sports. And when he wakes up, the first thing he wants to do is get his supply. And the last thing he thinks about at night is how he's going to get his supply the next day. Right? Are we together? Now, the desire also increases. It's often strong and overpowering. And so we heard from our definition that when a person cannot control, so it means that the desire, the urge to take, overrides your willpower or your ability to say no. So basically, the person just wants to go, and usually would do things, would go out of their way, would do everything possible to go get their supply, despite knowing the consequences, the harmful consequences. So at this point, when a person is dependent, they say we don't use the word addiction anymore because it is derogatory. So we use dependent. So when I use dependent, I'm actually talking about addiction, right? So the person basically has seized, has lost his ability to say no to this choice substance. And it could be legal or illegal. So for instance, we have some legal drugs, up until, very recently, that there's some regulation around it. For example, tramadol. Tramadol is an opioid, right? It is used it's a painkiller. So it means that with prescription, you can get it. It means it's legal. It's supposed to play a vital function. But we have a whole lot of people abusing it, right? And we also have marijuana or cocaine or heroin. These are not legal. You don't get that. So just to give you a fair idea of when I say legal or not legal. And then the person cannot control the impulse or urge, just like we said. Then you start to notice physical changes in the areas of the brain that are critical for judgment, decision-making, learning, memory, and behavioral control. Can you see that? That it affects the most vital part of the brain. Now, first of all, it physically alters it. That's one. Two, it changes areas that are critical for judgment, like that involves decision-making, learning, memory, and behavioral control. So if you've ever been with a person who skips, I'm going to use the language skip because that's the street term, but he goes blank. So for example, you're talking with a person and he skips. And then after a minute or a moment rather, he goes like, what was I saying? I don't know if you ever experienced that. We see a whole lot of that. We call it skip. Sometimes you find that the person goes blank, and then when he comes back, tries to cover up by just saying anything to make you believe that he was with you, right? So you find memory loss. Decision making. So have you ever wondered why people who are hooked on substances have a trail of bad decisions, right? They just tend to make one wrong decision after the other. In my days, I saw some craziness. And I always use one example that till this day just baffles me. Some guys who were from Minsk, their parents were very, very wealthy, and somehow they lost their parents, both their parents. So they had to fend for themselves. Thankfully, there was a lot of means behind. But so they took one wrong decision and went down the path of addiction. And they wasted everything, to the extent that while they were still living in their house, they sold the roof of their house. Yes, like they sold houses, lands, cars, everything, and started with furnishings. And when there was no more furnishing to sell, they sold the roof over their head while they were still living in it. Does that sound like good judgment? Addiction. And I can keep telling you, or deciding, for example, this one is funny, to hide behind a corn stalk when the police came to raid. Do you know what a corn stalk is? Like how am I going to, but you know maize, right? Just like this, good. So imagine a person doing this. I mean, he's hiding from the cops, right? So he actually thought that was sufficient enough to hide him from police. So impaired judgment, wrong judgment. You see that a whole lot. And then memory loss. You find that people are beginning to forget a lot. And then issues around behavior also. Now, also there's always the very high chance of returning to the substance even when you try to stay away from it. So that is called relapse. For example, a person might realize that, look, man, I don't want to keep down this path. I can count a whole lot of losses. I need out. And maybe starts walking towards getting his life back. And then before you know it, relapses. Because the urge overpowers the person. Are we together? So drug dependence involves compulsive engagement with the behavior or a preoccupation with it. It also is persistent and it's progressive, right? It's progressive. At the end of the day, you find that the person gets to a point, if not helped, gets to a point that they end up in one of three of this: a mental institution, jail, or death. And trust me, this is the best outcome you can get. If you work hard on the path of drug use, one of three things you would get: jail, mental institution, or death. Now, the heart of addiction is excessive dependency. It's unhealthy dependency. The dependency that is destroying in its effect, right? So we don't want to really go down that path. Are we together? Just a brief definition of what, I don't know if that was brief anyway, what dependence is. Now, having defined dependence, let's talk about what recovery is. Remember, we're talking about drug use, dependence, and recovery. So what's recovery? Now, recovery is a process of change, and through which people improve their health and wellness. They strive to reach their full potential on the path of recovery. And even people who have actually been addicted with very chronically, have the hope of coming back on track, right? So if you know someone who is already hooked on substances or any addictive behavior, right? That person, it's not a basket case. It's not a lost hope. It means that the person can really come back on their feet again. Albeit, medically, you'll be told that, and this is why it's advisable that you never start. The recovery rate medically is 1% out of 100. So it means that you have a 99.9 failure rate. 99.9 chance of not coming back from it. Just 1%. So that's not very encouraging, is it? It's not. So, having said this, let's look at just few statistics of the drug use situation in Nigeria. Just brief statistics so that we would know that it's not very far. It is right here with us. It's right here with us. Now, how many of you know that Nigeria is a major route for transporting substances? How many of you know that? Like the global market for illegal substances really relies heavily on Nigeria to transport it from one point to the other. And you know what happens when a place is like a major route is that as things pass through, some fall back, right? Some are kept behind. And so that's why there's an increasing rate of drug use in Nigeria. And the UNODC, the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, conducted a very, very comprehensive research in 2017, 2018, and came up with very good statistics. So now people can speak to data when they talk about substance use disorders or substance use problems. So that is on the internet. You can just get the whole report. If you typed UNODC report, drug report, you're going to get the whole thing. I recommend that you do and actually read it. It's very, very nice. So I'm going to skip a lot. I don't know how much time I have. So I'm just going to touch it a little bit, but I've recommended that you download the report. Very, very, very helpful if you can read it. About 10.6 million Nigerians use cannabis. 10.6 million. That's what you call Igbo or wee or weed. About 10.6 million Nigerians use this. About 4.6 million Nigerians use opioids. That's the tramadol and those other painkillers, that are in the market. Cough syrup, about 2.4 million Nigerians use this. An estimated 14.3 million people aged between 15 and 64 years had used drugs. About 14.3 million. So, and then you find the age group, 15 to 64. And what does that begin to tell you? That the most productive part of society is really giving into these dangerous menace. You find that about 14.4 of population in Nigeria used drugs in 2017. About 14.4% of this population. Now, about 1 out of 7 have used drugs in the past year, age 15 to 64. So if you counted 7 people, you would find every 7 person you count, right? The 7th has used drug. Okay. Okay, so 1 in 7 has used drug. So if you count 7 people, you'll find that the 7th person has used drug. And then, again, if 1 in every 4 is a woman. So most times you find that drug use is usually associated with boys or guys. But the research actually revealed that 1 out of every 4 is a woman. So if you were to count 2, 3, 4, you find 1 woman who is using substance. And I know from experience, because we go into the jungles, we see these things. I mean, the drug use among women is spiking rapidly, right? So it's not just a guy thing, right? And then you find that there are high risk users as well. And 1 in 5 is a high risk user. It means that 1 out of every 5 injects drugs. And you know why it's high risk? Because, of course, this is one way you can spread diseases and all of those things. They don't have enough money, so because of the craving, they can share needles. And before you know it, you find that there's rapid transmission of disease. Overall, 1 in 5 drug user is dependent. So it means that if you counted 5 persons, 1 out of that 5 is already addicted. 1 out of every 5 person you count is already dependent. 1 in 5 people who have actually used pharmaceuticals like tramadol, I'll always use that, is already hooked on it. And then 1 in 3 cannabis user is dependent. You find like people who use weed, 1 out of 3 is already dependent. So these statistics are very, very rich. It gives us perspective. I'm going to just not go into much detail of it. Please, I recommend that for our senior colleagues in the house, please just, if you could download that report and make it available to them. It really helps bring the message home when you see that a whole lot of people are actually wasting away. Now, why do people actually start using substances? These statistics was very, very revealing also, and it identified a couple of factors. And I'll just mention very quickly. One, it says personality traits. So the kind of personality a person has, traits a person has, can predispose a person to use substances. Also, mental health disorders. So, for example, some people suffer from mental health disorders, and because they get prescription to control that, they can become hooked on these prescriptive drugs as well. Then there's family abuse. And this is where I feel like the church can do a whole lot, because when people are coming from abusive family systems, like abusive parenting and chaotic family environment, that can really predispose a person to use. Also, poor attachment to community or school. So when a person is not properly attached, to a community, there's no community system that carries everybody along, this can cause people to use. And also growing up in marginalized society or poor societies. There's this place in Jos where we work, it's called Jenta. And if you are familiar with Jenta, that's like a slum area. Now, the norm, you find the norm, people start using as early as 8 years old. As early as 8. By 14, they're already way, way addicted. I don't know if you've heard news around here, but there's a spike in cultism and cult-related violence in Jos. And most of these guys are killing themselves, and trust me, the people who are wielding firearms and all, like, they're between the ranges of 13 to 18 years of age, with the majority being in their early teens. That's what drugs can do. It's really real, guys. It's real. And you don't want to get started. Now, so we said personality traits, mental health disorders, family neglect and abuse, poor attachments to school and community, and then growing up in depraved societies. Also, there are also genetic factors. People can be genetically predisposed. It means that if you had a history of drug use in your family, you're predisposed genetically to use substances. What that means is this. Do you think maybe I should ask, do you think there's an instrument that we can use in measuring whether you're genetically predisposed or not? I don't think so. So the best thing is that you never start. Because for a genetically predisposed person, you never may have used substances in your life, but the very first time you do, there will be a click. It's like a key fitting into a lock. It's like you found purpose, right? And you are more likely to continue using and get hooked on it. But generally, I believe that the reason why people use substances is that man, since the fall in the garden, has had this gaping hole in their hearts. Okay? There's this hole in our hearts that we always try to fill with people, with places, or with things. We feel that when we get enough things, or when we get enough people liking us, or we can travel a lot of places, or we can give ourselves certain kinds of experiences, we can create happiness, and we can fill that void in our hearts, right? But the truth is, only God, only Christ can fill that void in our heart. And so you would notice that is what the world system has actually relied on to get people on this fast, destructive pace. For example, consumerism and materialism. iPhone whatever, I don't know, I mean, if iPhone 7 really just came out, and then you find the next week iPhone 8. And because we feel like the more things we have, the happier we can get, is that we are trying to get the next good thing and the next good thing. So there's this gaping hole in our hearts that we're trying to fill. So people who use substances are almost always trying to escape a particular experience. When you dig deeper, you would find that there's a sense, there's a void that they're trying to fill. And this is from, facts. Most of the things I'm saying here basically are facts because like I said, I've used substances myself, and I've spent the last decade of my life working in this area, right? So you find that people are always trying to escape a situation, cope with a situation, evade a situation. They're always trying to run away from something, and so substances become their escape. But it's only temporal. I can tell you from experience that my first high was the best high of my life. I'm not advocating substance use, so don't try to go get a good high, right? But my first high was awesome. It was great. And it wasn't until years later I realized what pushed me into using, right? So I lost my dad when I was 6 years of age, and then I had to grow up through harsh realities. By 6 years, I had to become a man. And by 13, I was already trying to pay bills, right? So I hated my realities. I didn't want to be in my real world. And so what I did was create an alternate world. And I was looking for things that would get me away from these experiences. And so the first time I used substances, I felt like I had found an escape. Until, of course, it became a problem. Right? So yes, you would find an escape, but it's very, very temporal. And I don't know if you heard it in that first poem we read. I don't have much time. Okay, so I hope you get something out of this. But generally, think about substance use as a cancer, like a cancer. It starts very small, but it continues to what? To grow, right? Someone, I forget the person now, said about alcohol that first you take a drink, then the drink drinks the drink, then the drink drinks you. First you take a drink, then the drink drinks a drink, and then the drink drinks you. That's the progression. So the first time it's awesome. You find that you might even, many people will tell you, weed is a herb. That's not a drug, it's a herb. It gets me thinking smart. Well, I experienced it for a time being. Weed was my best substance anyway. I took it in every form, cooked, smoked, chewed, brewed, in every form, right? Just to find the next high. But you know what? It was just temporal. A lot of people are telling you, it's been legalized. There's medical marijuana. But the truth is, you who started using it, what medical condition do you have? Right? So there's a whole lot of cover. And over a long period of time, research is really beginning to show that marijuana is very, very dangerous, associated with schizophrenia, memory loss, and all of those things. Schizophrenia is losing yourself. It's some mental condition. Now, so it continues, it is progressive. It is progressive. Now you find that people generally use substances for one of the following reasons. Excuse me. You find that they use for one of the following reasons. Basically, as it affects their mood, right? So you find that my notes have just suddenly gone blur. Maybe I'm trying to rush. How interesting. Does this happen to you? Okay. Ay. Anyways, I guess I'll just freestyle at this point. I'm looking for some key words that I had hoped we would talk about. Okay, great, good, found it. Now, people use to, I didn't find it. Yikes. Anyways, so first of all, it's either you're trying to avoid the situation. I'll just talk about the general idea. I wanted to use some terms. So avoid like a situation, so they're trying to run away from it. Others are just trying to pacify. You understand? So they want to feel like something that relaxes them. Others are trying to run away. Others are trying to relax. But others use as a result of self-hate that leads them to try to erase themselves. So people who actually use to get them energized to do stuff are maybe people who consider themselves very productive, or people who feel like this is associated with high productivity, or I just want to get my groove on. So maybe a club person, so because they want to dance a lot or get bold and do crazy things, they want to use. So these guys are always trying to up their mood. For other people, they use because they're trying to relax, right? I just want to shut down the noise and I just want to relax. I just want to create an equilibrium. But other people use because of self-hate. Now, here's the deal. When you start using substances over a period of time, the one word that would really, really, really be associated with your life is loss. You're going to start losing things. First, you might lose your physical looks, and then you start losing trust because you've started doing some crazy things and people are beginning to notice you're not so trustworthy. Then you start losing relationships. Then you start losing resources. So loss. Now, as a result, you find that the pattern is a lot of people just stop doing important things. So some people just stop going to work. Others just drop out of school just because they want to keep using, right? Now, because of that, over a period of time, they come to hate the person they now represent, such that they're always trying to not deal with that person. And so what they do is more drugs. We get the general idea, right? I think I should wrap up at this point because my time is almost up. But let me just talk about three quick things, and then maybe that will become my final thoughts on this. Now you might wonder, why is addiction so strong in its grip? So strong in its grip. And please, if you have the time and you have the data, there's so much information. Please look at how it affects the brain. But I'll just give you a quick sneak peek, like a quick look into it. Now, the brain is your powerhouse. The brain is an amazing machine. And if used properly, you can be anything you actually choose to be or set out to be. There's the part of the brain called the reptilian brain or the primitive brain or the limbic system. And science says that this is the part that develops before the very critical parts of our brain, like the part where we used to, the executive functions, thinking, cognitive, logic, and all of those things. Now, this primitive part has a place called the reward center. Okay? The reward center. Now, because you and I, human beings, we tend to repeat things that make us happy. So if you did a thing and you got a positive feedback from that thing, what are you likely to do again? To repeat it. It's called the incentive apparatus. You basically would do it again. So if I ate at a restaurant and I enjoyed their food, what am I going to do? I'll go back there. All right? If I tried out a drink and I enjoyed it, what am I likely to do? Repeat it again. Now, like I told you, your first high is usually very great. And because of that feeling you got, right, you're likely to repeat it again. Addiction also affects short-term memory, such that you don't even remember the negative things you experienced when you used the substance. So, for example, I got high yesterday, and on my way from the club, I was beaten, I was robbed, I ended up sleeping on someone's corridor. Actually, true life story. Once I found myself in the morning on a corridor. I didn't find my way home, right? So that's how crazy it can get. Now, when I remember the substance, I don't remember these negative consequences. All I remember is how great it made me feel. So what I do is I skip all of the lessons and go back to use. Why does this happen? God created us with our very, very natural hormones that make us happy, that regulates mood, that helps us eat, that helps us sleep. One key of such hormone is called dopamine, right? So ever wonder why some drugs are called dope? Because dopamine is our natural high, happy juice. It's why you can watch a football match and be very calm, and when a goal goes into the net, everybody's screaming. You can go from 0 to 100. That feeling of excitement, motivation that you get, dopamine is responsible for it. Now, when you take a substance, and a substance, it can either it floods the brain. Let me just put it very simple. Floods the brain with too much dopamine, right? And because there's too much dopamine in your brain, then that's what accounts for feeling high. So let's say, for example, your brain has 100, and you take an alternate substance, and that substance flooded with 20 more. How much are you having? 120. That's not normal, right? It's not normal. But the body has the ability to regulate itself, right? So those of you who did biology know of homeostasis, right? It regulates itself and brings it back to equilibrium. So what the body does is it reduces your dopamine level so that it can balance out. So you no longer feel high anymore. This keeps on happening every single time that you use until the quantity that used to get you there stops getting you there. It's called tolerance. So you have to up your dose. So nobody ever started by using a crate of beer, for example. It starts little by little. And that's why, some people tell you, they cancel bottles, right? I take a lot of beer. Now, as you keep using, your natural neurotransmitters that are responsible for healthy functions keeps dropping because different kinds of drugs imitate your different neurotransmitters. So dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, all of those things. Please, like I told you, sometimes you can't risk sounding that way. I don't want to sound that way. Now, bottom line is that your brain keeps producing less and less until one day your brain loses the capacity to produce it. So that you now depend on the external source for normal function. Does that make sense? That is why a person would wake up and start using substances even though they know the negative consequences. So it gets to a point where your substance is not being used for pleasure anymore, but it's used for survival. The term addiction comes from the word addictus, right? In ancient Roman times, an addictus was someone who was indebted, who had borrowed some money and could not pay, and has to be sold to his master or the person who he was owing as a slave. And it means that that person ceases to make, decisions by themselves, right? Until their master says so. So addiction is actually slavery. It's a time where a person has become slave to the substances and can no longer function normally because of his dependence on this. I hope that makes sense. But now I want to close with recovery because I didn't come here to paint a picture of gloom. I want to paint a picture of hope. Like I told you, I was hooked on substances myself. In the past 8 years, actually in June of 2012, I think June 2nd, 2012, I took my last substances. And from that day until now, I've been clean. It means it's very possible. And I have a score of friends who have actually walked this path, and are now clean. And it means that there's a way out of it. There's this Japanese art called kintsugi. And that's where I want to draw an analogy from. This art was an art that the Japanese relied on to mend broken pots, china, broken ceramics. What they did was melt real gold or gold dust and then used it to mend the broken pots or plates such that you could still see the cracks of the brokenness. But it was such beauty to behold because it was mended in gold. And so if you've fallen apart, if you're at that point where you've broken, God can make you beautiful. He can actually make you, think of it. Only God can take the stupid things I've done and give it back to me as a tool of ministry. Like I told you, one of my prized credentials for doing this is that I was once stupid and I used substances myself. Right? So that I'm talking to you from experience is that brokenness, okay, that God is using. So there's nothing in your life that is beyond repair. You can be made to look good again. But it takes a deliberateness. Remember, dependence was actually at the point where you started to rely on the substances for survival. The part of recovery requires dependence as well. It requires dependence as well. Dependent on who? The one true God. It's only God who can take a brain that has been altered and make it whole again. It requires humility and a dependence on Him, knowing that I am not my own. It's yielding to Him on an everyday and every moment basis. Daily. Not using yesterday's dose for today. Daily dependence. Daily dependence. And not even just daily, moment by moment, second by second dependence. That's what can get you clean. Along with certain principles. Of course, there are medical approaches to recovery and all of that. But I'd like to let you know that if you're humble enough to first of all admit that you have failed woefully and that you're in a powerless battle, a battle against addiction that you're already losing, and that you'll be honest with yourself to tell yourself, I've tried everything and it's not working, and I cannot win this battle by myself. And then you yield to God. There's nothing I've not seen Him do. Trust me. I've sat across from people who have blood on their hands, who have been gang members, who have been written off, who the society thought they had gone mad, and God has restored them back and is using them as very tools in the fight against substance use. So if you're sitting here and you're already started, and that you can still be here means you're not there yet. So please don't let it get to a point where you cannot be amongst us. Right? And it's so with every behavior, every habit. I'll end with this hymn because it drives home the point. I'm sorry I may not have done as much justice because of time, but I hope that you picked something. It says, this hymn I love actually. It says, when I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast save in the cross of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. That is what it's required on the fight against any form of addiction. That you humble yourself and realize that you're not your own, and realize that you've been bought at a very, very priced, commodity. That it took death to get you, to get you back. That you were once lost and condemned and doomed, but God, moved by love for you, decides to shed this precious blood. And that you realize that nothing is beyond him. And you yield. And you come to a place of dependence. There's no addiction that you cannot overcome. We may have talked about addiction to substances alone, but you and I know there are many other forms of addiction. Sex, pornography, masturbation, food, party, compulsive shoppers. Anything really that you're struggling with and you do not have the power to stop right now, you can lay it at the foot of the cross. And oh Lord, he's waiting, arms wide open, to receive you back into the fold and to grant you victory over your addictions. Amen.
I was meant to go to school, but then I got high. I was going to get first class, but then I got high. I probably would have had a house by now, but I know why. 'Cause I got high, 'cause I got high. There's a funny song like that. Those of us that were in the high, we know these songs. Yes, we know these songs. If you know my own story of high, it's very interesting. It was that I had a natural high that they thought I was getting high. And I was expelled at the time of my SS2 because they thought I'm a high person. And my dad didn't believe me because when he went to see my principal, she convinced him that I get high. So I said to her, since I didn't get high and they said I was getting high, let me get the high and know what the high can do. And that was how I started getting high. So you can imagine, people have different stories, different experiences. But God delivered me as well. Otherwise, of course, I won't be standing here. Okay? So whatever your route of getting high, however you started, God can save us. One of my classmates then in secondary school, like I said, I wasn't getting high. But when we met in uni, she said, usually when she saw me coming, she usually takes another route. My classmate. And I was like, why? She couldn't just explain. And she said that if you can change, that is the me that was not getting high that she knows. How much more if she had known me when I was getting the high? That if you can change, then all my Christianity self, I don't think I'm doing anything. So God can change anyone, whatever the challenge. Like he said, there are diverse addictions. And I don't want to believe that This is all that he can give us. I'm sure you are here for a bit. Please, if you feel you need to see him, he's available. Sorry, we know we have programs lined up, and that's why we have to, just move on. But if you feel you need to see him, or you even need his contact, please let us know. I'm sure he will be very happy to continue this conversation with you. Even if not for yourself, for someone else that you are burdened for, that you believe God can help. He is here to help us. Amen. We had our morning devotions today, like we planned. Lots of you were not there. I think that the most we had at a point was 17. All right, mostly workers, but we had a great time. So basically, the app is up and running. How many of us got the link yesterday night? There was a broadcast. How many of us got it? Okay, don't worry, we are not offended. We'll still attempt to send again today. And as many of you as can join by 6 a.m., we'll be happy to have devotions with you. We had a great time today. Please, just go. How many of you don't have a Bible study class here? If you are just coming today and you don't have a Bible study class, please come to me. Otherwise, those of you that have, please move to your classes now. Thank you very much.